Okay, welcome to the Working Wellbeing podcast. And our latest episode, we have got Jake Sanders, who is the Global Employee Wellbeing Lead. That sounds like a fancy title, Jake. He's going to tell us a little bit more about the role that you do now and how you got to where you were, got to this role, because we were talking off air a little bit, and there's an interesting journey up until that point. So it'd be great to hear a little bit more about that. So yeah, do you want to jump in and introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. So, see, my name's Jake Sanders. It's interesting. My title has changed now, so I'm the Global Health and Wellbeing Manager. So I thought I'd
Sorry.
slide that in. It's all good. It's a brand new change because I've recently joined a new organisation. Um, so I've completely wiped my mind there.
So
But
you work for Diageo, right?
yeah, so I work for Diageo. So looking at how we can design wellbeing strategy to support employees, not just in the UK, but we have around 27 to 30,000 employees across the
Wow.
world in lots of different geographies, across a series of different personas as well, because we have office, sales, farm, factory. So, as just as four key personas. So a really variety of people to improve the health of with different challenges in that, as I'm sure you can imagine.
Got you. Got you. And what part of the business do you work in? Have you got a team that you're a part of?
Yes, I work as part of. It's an interest because every organisation that I've spoken to and worked with, it always sits somewhere differently. So
Mm.
I sit as part of the occupational health team,
Got you.
as part of our kind of supply chain. But we look at not just supply chain, but also the whole office population as well. So work really closely in collaboration with benefits and rewards. Work really closely with other elements of the human resources area of the business, as well as then directly, as you can imagine, with a global organization, there's a complex matrix structure. So how do we reach different pockets across the world in terms of both markets and functional led when you have global functions? So not
Yeah.
a straight line to any piece or project of work.
Yeah. 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 That thing you said, it's so true. Where it sits in different places in different organizations, right? And I mean, I've had this similar conversation just recently on the podcast, but I don't think there's a right or a wrong place for it to sit. I don't know. What do you think? I think it's just whatever works for that business at that time. I'm not sure.
I think I think where it starts is where has someone actually had a passion or an interest in well-being, and I think that's kind of where within the business we've seen often there's a lot of parts of well-being, and traditionally benefits has been a really strong area because they have access to the tools and the things that we can do. It being to do with people, that's why HR often you see being involved in it. But I've also seen organizations take it out and it's completely its own thing and structure it like that. um, I think it's, as you said, it's what suits the business and how the business operates
Yeah.
in the short term. Longer term, I think we're going to, as we start to dig into what does well-being actually mean, and also what does the organization you're in expect you to do working on well-being. Because I think that even that definition changes organization to organization. So I think it's the work that is expected of you defines kind of where you sit within the business, I think.
Mm,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I love that you sort of noted there the role of passion in doing this, and actually that quite often comes up in these conversations. The role that passion plays. Are you able to kind of give us a little bit more background about where your passion comes from for this work?
Yeah, it's I like to call myself a failed sports scientist because I thought that the job of dreams and everything that I wanted to be was a professional sportsman. I actually wanted to be a professional sportsman. I was thinking, what sport am I particularly good at? And I was okay at a few. And then how do I do that and make a career out of that? Then realize that I'm not very good at any of those sports to actually earn a living from them. So I thought the next best thing is, well, how can I work in? I was good at science at school. It was like, how can I then make a career out of working professional sport, getting people to perform at the best that they can, and being a hotshot sports scientist?
Yeah.
which, which when it came down to it, and when I started actually working as a sports scientist, I really disliked it. Which is, as I'm sure you can imagine, it's like it's a, I wouldn't call it a crisis of identity, but something close to that, where all the work done and all the attention put into something was ultimately to get to this point of a job I actually don't enjoy. And I don't enjoy the going to work day to day. I don't enjoy how I do it, and I don't enjoy the outputs that I'm getting or the career path laid out in front of me. Because effectively, what I was looking at is the guy whose job I really want is somewhere between 50 and 60 years old and still wants to work for another 10 years. So am I going to have to wait till I'm 50 or 60 years old to actually have the job that I want to have? And do I actually even want that job anymore? So I guess the passion and what it for me came down to is what is the bit of this job that I really love? And the bit that I really loved is coaching and working with
Mm,
people to create change. And I think that's for me where the passion was. I'd always thought about how can I eat well to get better at, when I was trying to be a pro sportsman, how can I eat
yeah,
better? How can I train better? What are the 1% improvements that I can make for me in that individual optimization? And then it was like, well, how can I deliver that to more people than a professional sports team?
yeah,
Um, so that really drove the
yeah.
passion.
So then you found yourself in this, in a setting where you were doing that within a workplace.
No. So
So
I
what
actually
next?
I did a project at university looking at nudge theory. So the whole theory of if we incentivize behavior, then we can create new behaviors. Which is a butchered short form of what nudge theory is. So I'm sure Matt, you
Pretty
can give
good to me.
a
Yeah.
more detailed approach to that. But in that project, focused on health and weight loss effectively. But the project was how can we get people exercising and what are the components that we need to have for people to regularly exercise and commit to improving basic health markers from a fitness test and weight in centimeters. And long project short, effectively what we did was we said, if you donate money at the start of the challenge, we'll make the challenge completely free. And at the end of every 6 weeks, all the money that was given in will give back out based on
Mm,
these parameters, based on people who improved their fitness test the most, people that were most attended the most sessions. So what we wanted to endorse was the behaviors that we wanted people to do. And then some prizes around weight loss, centimeter loss, etc. And it was just really fun. It ended up with 300 people working out in a park every week. That's how we kept it free. It's just body weight, hit exercise, very basic kind of, Joe Wicks style stuff.
mm,
But just to see could we build a community and could we do something fun, which was pretty cool. Really,
mm.
so you say the passion. I kind of just went back to doing that. Just I went home, said to my parents, I'll work out what I can do, but let's just do this in the meantime. And it resulted in me actually running a local small group PT studio. So a small group PT studio reached out. They said, "Look, we want you to come run the facility, work with us, and revamp how we will look after our clients, create a premium experience, and also look at how can we use technology to improve the experience for our members because it's a premium product." Um, so yeah, so it just that transition into coaching group for free, coaching high value in terms of the cost that people had to pay to come, but then how can we improve that experience? So, and the big thing, this is 10 years ago kind of time. So wherever 2024, 2014-ish kind of time. Is that how can we impact people when they're not in the gym? Was my
Mm,
main focus. Is the gym piece is relatively simple. There's enough research, there's enough data that as long as people enjoy themselves and do some fundamental basics, there's people will get results in terms of the gym side of the time. But it's what they do in the 23 hours they're not in the gym with me, and how can
mm,
we influence that behavior?
mm,
Um, so we looked at things around creating those same kind of drivers that we looked at, which was from the community program, which is, well, how do we create competition? How do we create the social interactivity? And looked at just using some digital tech, which now is pretty common. You see in gyms things like MyZone,
Yeah.
Ways of tracking what your lifts were and seeing what other people in the gym were doing, and just creating that kind of social competition was really cool. So I did that for 2 years. And I just interestingly, you'll see this, I've kind of fallen into opportunities, which has been quite nice. And I guess it's that whole bit about you can only take an opportunity if you're prepared at the time. So I've been very lucky over the last 10 years. But there are some small elements that apply to that luck. And I think that then that's someone that I worked with as a sports scientist was working for AXA Health Insurance and started as one of their health physiologists talking about working with companies. And he basically shared with me that, look, insurance, there's a space here where we need people to be healthy for the insurance model to work. So there's investment going on here. There's something in this space right now. And it happened to be that then a couple of weeks later, a job popped up at Vitality to be, I think it was third in the door of their internal kind of business consulting team for clients that were already on board. How can we support those clients to encourage employees to engage in Vitality, but also engage in healthy behaviors, and go literally client to client with Vitality data on how to do that. And I guess that's where the luck comes in. The fact that I've got a university project on nudge theory, then the gym work to looking at how do we use digital technology alongside human experience. And that was pretty much the entire Vitality proposition at the time. And it was a really good marry of me to them and them to me. And it was the perfect kind of looking to have a wider impact on more people. And yeah, it's a fantastic foray. And that's kind of where I started into getting into, okay, how do we create engagement in health that's not just on I want to get healthier and I'm paying someone to do it, but a population where they're not paying for you to make them healthier. They're expecting you to pay them to turn up. So how do we start to combat that challenge? And that's kind of 7 years ago, and then I've found my way through this corporate wellbeing world since then.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you mentioned a couple of times luck and that you've just sort of found your way, but it sounds like you've put some, hard time in actually learning things and seeing things on the ground, looking at behaviors, looking at how people engage with their health and well-being. So it sounds like great foundations for the work that you've done since. When you were talking, then you talked about that when you were working for the gym about that 1 hour and how do you get people to have that behavior outside of that 1 hour, the other 23 hours of the day. And one thing with workplace wellbeing programs is sometimes I feel like the conversation is that it's a bit a nice to have or optional, or the companies that are good are managing to do it. But if you think about where we're spending our time, just back to that point about, okay, it's an hour in the gym, we can't address our health in that 1 hour, can we? And that be it. Think about where we're spending our time, and we talk about this stat all the time, but like it's 1/3 of our lives that we spend at work. So there really is such a valid place for us to pay attention to the health and well-being of all of our employees. Yet somehow it still seems to be a little bit of a struggle, even though that's such a significant part of our time and our day.
It's a similar conversation that we can look in terms of politics as well. It's how much should you be involved in X within someone's lives? And I think within the workplace, and a similar conversation I've had recently is about trust. Is that how do you build trust with employees that you're actually, if you're collecting health data, you're not going to use that health data to punish employees. I mean, even with all the laws and all the protection we have in Europe, there's still, I think, huge amounts of skepticism that comes with that. And there has been for the entire time that I've the short career I've had. But I think there's fundamentally whether health and well-being, whether an employer should or shouldn't, or whether employees should or shouldn't engage, I think there's a huge moral obligation of an employer, as you say, because people are spending so much time in your capacity, driving the results for your business. There's an obligation to do whatever you can to have an impact on their health. And it's not just, and I think this kind of comes into that bit, and this was something that I said right when I joined Vitality, is that the desire that has grown in me is how can I have a bigger impact? Because in a community program, it's 100 people. The gym, it's 150 people, and that's all I can reach. In consulting, you could argue it's bigger or smaller because you're working with companies that you don't see necessarily the hands-on what's going on with companies. But when you're an employer, it's not just the employees, it's the employees' friends and family that you can have a knock-on impact to. And we've seen this with some benefits, how you can extend the benefits forward onto friends and family. And that's even not in traditional well-being benefits, things like just parental leave and things like that. Those can have huge impacts on not just your employee, but the people that they spend the most time with, their circle of influences that they have. And I think when we're talking about the public health issues that we have, especially if we just look at the UK, for as long as I can remember, we've been talking about a public health issue with people struggling with what they eat, struggling with how much they exercise, the risks of cancer and heart disease being what they are. If you just took a workplace programs with high engagement and we can get that bit right and that influence spreads, we can make a huge shift on that number. But what's really apparent is that we haven't done that very well yet.
There's an opportunity there, right? I don't know if you've seen any of the work. I really love the work that Deloitte are doing at the moment around human sustainability. Jen Fisher and all her work, she does, and describing well-being as an outcome of work, and that really resonated with me, and articulated how I think I've been trying to describe how employers should approach well-being for many years. But yeah, just seeing it down in black and white and the way they described it as it's an outcome in the same way that performance or your salary might be, I guess, an outcome in terms of that's what you're earning for having done the work. But there's a huge opportunity there to see well-being as an outcome. It's not just something that like you say, you break down to just a handful of benefits, but it's how is work as a whole contributing to this person's life, and the lives of the people who they come into contact with as well.
No, it's exactly that, and I think I'm relatively familiar with the work because I was fortunate enough that in my last company did a really cool piece of work with Deloitte, the UK based human sustainability team and wellbeing team, looking at how do we measure wellbeing within the organization, but not in a traditional sense of are people happy or are people recording that they're X on a scale of 1 to 10, but actually looking at what are we doing as an organization that impacts well-being? What are people actually doing? And then how do people feel? And looking at it in one space as opposed to just looking, as you say, are people saying they're stressed or not? Or are people leaving? Just looking at it as a whole and having that conversation. I think performance is a really dirty word in the well-being space, but one that I don't think should be in it. And I'm guilty for this from coming from a sports environment where performance is the only currency that matters, and it's one of those important things. And I think we can start to say that in the work environment is that performance is the only currency that matters, because if the company doesn't perform, no one has a job. No one has an income. All the nice things we want to do, we can't do if we don't have a successful company. So that has to be number one. But I think, Matt, you've spoken about this before as well, is that like well-being is a component of performance. If you're not well, you cannot perform. We see at the moment, we've had in the Premier League the highest number of injuries in a season ever. And it's no wonder when we've had a World Cup in a mid-season, shortened breaks, straight through, shortened summer because of that, and then straight now into a Euros, we're going to probably see that injury rate skyrocket September, October this year. and everyone knows it's coming. And I think that's the bit to think about, is that we cannot perform if we don't have well people. And and I think, Jen, you can be a high functioning, unwell person. At some point that catches up. And it's the two that I think we can start to talk about. And I think that pressure versus performance conversation, when to know when to take a step back, when to know. And this is not as a company. I don't think necessarily a company needs to do this. But you see like Nike doing company-wide shutdowns for 2 days. I don't necessarily think that's the answer, because then that's just suggesting that this is the time that people need rest. Whereas you don't know if for somebody that might be the worst time for them to have rest in terms of them achieving the performance you want. But it's around to have the skill and capability in individuals to know, when do I need to push and when do I need to scale back, so that I can achieve, or I can perform at my best at all times. And it's knowing that. I think that's maybe an important conversation to start to have.
Yeah, I'm always wrangling with that. Me and Alethea, I think we did a podcast a little while ago, and we started to have that conversation around how organizations can practically influence the well-being of their employees. And one of the things that we were just talking around was, are you right to do a 2 days everyone shuts down? Are you right to say no one can send an email after 5 o'clock? This sort of thing. And on the one hand, I feel like absolutely not, because it takes away individual choice and autonomy and all the rest of it. The only thing that kind of appeals to me about it is, I sometimes feel, and I put myself in this category, if left to your own devices, a lot of human beings, they just push it, right? They just push it, and it almost needs. So you use the example of like exercise and weight loss and all the rest of it, like. So I go to the gym fairly regularly, but it really helps to have some people who I go with who force me to go, because if they weren't there, I wouldn't do it, because I don't know, inherently lazy, I guess, but in that part of my life. But then I don't think that's the right way to do it. You shouldn't have a paternalistic culture where you're forcing people to engage in with their well-being.
Have you seen?
But I think the way you've described it there about, it's the mindset, right? It's giving people the mindset where they can make those choices at the right time.
Have you seen any good examples of it, Jake? In not necessarily in the organisations you've been in, but maybe when you were at Vitality, so you were seeing lots of different companies and their approaches.
That's a great question, and I don't want to throw anyone under the bus.
Yeah, name names, please. No, joking.
I think, do you know? And the answer overarchingly is no. And I think the reason for that is we haven't properly cracked measurement of well-being in a way in which we can actually say something is effective. And I mean well-being in terms of both what's going on within an organization, as well as individual health. And I don't think that in itself, I could call out some fantastic initiatives. Like if you look at some of the things that's going on in terms of health checks and being able to look individually at blood work, and that being offered to employees. There are some organizations I know which are doing that on scale, which is impressive. Again, it comes up, the whole trust piece is a big bit within that. And I guess the other thing I think within the measurement is then what is the outcome you actually want from measuring that? And I may get in trouble for saying this, but we can. I want to say it anyway. I think there's something in looking into how do we start to look at how we pay people based on behaviours we want people to exhibit. And I think there's something in, but you need a robust measure to be able to do that. And I don't necessarily think that we are quite there to be able. I don't mean we in terms of Diageo. I mean in terms of what the market can offer from a well-being measurement, or what actually we think we're measuring from a driver well-being. But if we want people to start to behave in certain ways, and I'm a big component of my responsibility is to show up to work in the best condition I possibly can. But my ability to show that capacity that I have is down to the team and the environment that I'm sat within, right? So how do we reward individuals for being as healthy as they possibly can? And then how do we reward teams or managers for creating the space for people to demonstrate their full capacity. And I think that could be a really interesting place to get into. I don't necessarily. I'm not saying that's the work that we're doing, because that's definitely not what we're doing yet. But I think that could be a really interesting avenue to go down. And by that, I don't mean we're bonusing managers based on if their employees are getting enough sleep. Like, I don't think that's not where I'm going with that. But in terms of, if you've got a manager that's creating an experience in their team where people feel that they belong, people feel competent in the job that they do, they have purpose and autonomy with how they work, and that they know that if they're struggling, they can turn around to the manager and say, look, I need some support here, and that they will be heard and treated fairly. I think there's something in that which we know fosters well-being for individuals and will drive performance if people feel like that. There's my throw out to the market.
How could we measure that though? How do you?
Well, that's the thing. I think this is one of those musings I've had in in a pub over one too many Guinnesses. Just to throw in
I'd tell you one which has kind of come to mind for me over the years is utilization, and whether there's something around that. So some organizations, they track utilization of hours quite closely, so in the legal profession and things like this, and typically you are rewarded for having high levels of utilization because that means they can make more money off you, but actually too high and you're a burnout risk, right? And you'll leave the organization, all the rest of it. So whether there is something, I don't know, again, I'm just spitballing here, but like whether there's something that related to that around how a manager manages those utilization levels within their team so that they're high enough so that they tick the performance box, but they're low enough so that you can be sure that people aren't burnt out. Again, it's a blunt instrument, and that's the problem, isn't it? But
I think it needs to be multifaceted, because you've got to look at because how people feel isn't necessarily always true, but it's still how they feel. So there's still value in that measure. It may not be the reality that is around that, but it's important to look at it. And if you look at how people feel, you look at what people are doing in terms of examples. Are people taking holiday? Are people off sick? Are people leaving the organization? And then look at what the organization or what the manager is doing. And if you look at all three, because then you can kind of identify, is the gap, there's a gap between what the reality is and how someone's feeling. Okay, so how can we work on that gap? Or is it the fact that, ultimately people are feeling bad, people are doing things which we know aren't supporting of them, and the reason being we can see that there's a big gap in terms of the dimensions or the drivers of well-being within a team. Okay, let's improve that. And I think that's you couldn't have a singular measure. You'd have to have a way of looking at all three.
Yeah. And the problem with well-being measures is they're often what's the word, like you don't know if high or low is good. So it'd be a fancy word for that. So like EAP usage, right? Employee assistance program usage. Is it good that it's high, or is it bad that it's high? Is it bad that it's high because everybody's stressed out and needs a counsellor, or is it good because they're accessing the support that they need? And you like you say, without the more complex measure behind that, you don't know the number. A single number doesn't tell you enough, does it?
No, exactly.
I think there is one example
that's interesting. Right, so we're going to pay people to improve their well-being. I love it.
There is one example we've come across, Matt, which is, and I've mentioned it before, I bring it up quite a bit, is Jodie Hill and Thrive Law. And I can't think now what the actual metrics are, but she's baked this into the performance review process, hasn't she? So that there's greater accountability from a KPIs review point of view, annually or quarterly, whenever that happens, around engagement in the wellbeing offerings that the organisation provides, which is extensive. And that's, a law firm. And in fact, she actually has removed the utilization hours from the just to your point, from the offering, hasn't she? Yeah,
Yeah,
which is
she's
very
taking them
unusual
away.
for a law firm.
Yeah.
But that's a good one, and I think she talks about it in her podcast with us. I can't remember now. A year ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Although, although the thing with that, and which leads to a question for Jake as well, is um, that's
Yeah.
quite a small organization, right? So and I always wonder, is it easier to do it at that kind of level, and then when you scale it up, which obviously, Jake, you mentioned, how many people did you say? About 5 million working?
27 to 30,000 people.
Wow, yeah, lots of people, lots of people. So how do you feel? What's the question? Like, how do you feel you do that across large populations? And you mentioned that you have a um, strategic responsibility for well-being, but how is that held centrally, or do you devolve autonomy locally? And how's that handled with such a large population?
So I'll give you, being brand new, I'll give you kind of what the ideal is, but also kind of looking back at where I've previously worked and some of the organizations have been in, how it's handled, because there isn't, again, I think this is very different and it depends on how the company has done things before. And I don't necessarily think it's always, oh, this is how it's always done, so therefore we'll keep doing that. I don't mean it like that. But if there's an expectation on a large population of this is how the relationship between the head office and the locality is run, you want to kind of design strategy based into how that expected relationship is. Because if you want to do something that's different to that relationship, you're probably going to find that people are resistant to that kind of change because it's how we operate together is really interesting. And I think an example of this on a large multinational scale that I know about is Rand Bank, which is a banking group in Africa, but actually all their banks are different brands, so they're not called Rand Bank. And they I was in a talk where they shared about how they create well-being change, and it is all centrally pushed. So it's a singular brand. Our well-being program is called this. You must deploy this, and this is how you do it. And they actually run it through communication. So it's another area that you could have well-being. They run it through comms, and it's in your branch, in your area, in your country, this is what you talk about. There's a small scope for individual personalization based on laws and offering, but that's how it's done, but that is also how they do everything. So there's that expectation. Whereas, for example, from Philip Morris, where I was before, and now at Diageo, you have individual countries they run themselves. There's a bit of guidance and a bit of standardization, obviously, and certain targets and commercial pressures from a central point. But individual countries, markets, even functions, global functions, can operate independently to a point. So it's all about influence and opportunity within that space. And I think it's for us, or for me, it's around how can we communicate a global philosophy that allows then it to be implemented locally through local language, local lens, local culture, which is where the term, you've probably had people say this before, but it's like think global, act local.
Yeah.
It's have that connection. So, and then celebrating those individual differences.
Yeah.
One of the really cool projects we did, or I did at PMI, was looking at collecting how do you, as a country, how do you deliver our global philosophy, collecting all that data in, and then sharing the case studies. So we're like, this is a really cool way in which Hong Kong demonstrated it physical health by doing a particular challenge, collecting that data, shaping some of their initiatives based on that data, and here's the result of it. And then saying, in complete contrast, here's how Turkey have talked about purpose in the workplace and how they've brought this messaging, and here are the kind of the experience days that they've created across their staff. And I think that for me in a global role, it's less about, are people eating well, are people sleeping well? It's how can we have those large scale things put on which are unique to countries where they have that freedom of creativity to make well-being their own, but knowing that they're applying effort, budget, and time into what is going to make a difference, as opposed to what can be easy, which is simply just choose a series of benefits, put them through a communications plan, and that's kind of the passive individual focus of well-being that can go on.
Yeah. But yeah. And I was going to ask as well, so you mentioned the role that managers play as well when you were coming up with your idea of incentivizing health across the organization. So you said that the conversations that managers have are crucial, right? And
I think there's a brilliant line which we have at Diageo, which I was really pleased to see when I joined, because it's something that I've been having a conversation about for a while, which is shared accountability. And it's that whole bit of, I think we've already talked about this a little bit, but individually you're wholly responsible for your health, because you're the one that eats, you're the one that drinks, you're the one that exercises. But that doesn't absolve teams, managers, and the organization of their responsibilities. They're independent things. So our teams and managers are wholly accountable for creating those inclusive environments for people. And that's why I think inclusion actually maybe is getting a little bit of a bad name at the moment, but actually is a super powerful tool, because it's not, inclusion is just about the team feeling that they can operate and they're safe within the environment they operate. A policy for every version of inclusion that we're talking about. And that list is getting longer and longer. You know, there'll be something new the media will say is an important inclusive topic, and suddenly that will come in, and there's that conversation around inclusive language. But I think if we're demonstrating that we're in our teams making people feel safe, heard, respected, doesn't matter however they want to show up to work within that space, then we can have high performing teams. And it frees managers, because the managers aren't looking at a long list of policies going, how do I support this person? It's treat them like a human being. If you need some support, here's how we can upskill the capability within managers to do that. But it's not based on a checkbox policy list, which might be a little bit controversial for some people. But I think it's about how can we bring that human touch back to managers, and the capability of being good human beings, and looking after people, and identifying biases and things like that are obviously so important. But it's how do we free them up to not be referring to a policy list and referring to the human being across the table from them, to have them feel the best that they can. And then obviously you have the organization, which is the organization, I think, is actually quite easy. And I think this is, something quite cool in that is the organization's sole responsibility is to provide the right tools, the time, or the environment for people to engage with those tools, and then to have senior leaders role model the behaviors to engage in those tools. I think, Matt, we've talked about this before. That's my twist on the COM-B model. Sense of capability is the right tools, opportunity is time and environment, motivation is, you could put nudge theory in there and put some cash on the table, but if your senior leader is doing something like taking their annual leave, not replying to emails when they're on holiday, or posting within whatever communication channel that they're doing something for their health, other people will do it. And as an organization, then we're doing good.
Why is no one doing it? No, some people are doing it. Some people are doing it.
So I think that there are multiple different ways of doing my job. As we've already talked about, some people it's communications. I like to think of myself as a specialist generalist, which is I understand enough of a lot of topics to understand how they fit together, and then I know that I need to ask for help in those topics. So I'm not a specialist communicator. I know I need the comms team support in delivery of any kind of well-being change. I also know a little bit around how we need to measure that, so I can then work with the people analytics team in terms of this is what I can communicate what I want, and then I go, I need your help how we get to that point, because I don't know that. And I think that's an important skill, is that wherever your specialism is, you need to know how to ask for help, because otherwise well-being becomes a siloed piece of work, or you end up in an individual place. So nothing that I've said today is wholly me. It's things that I've got from asking for help and building those awarenesses. And I think rolling right back to the time of Vitality, working with comms people, with HR people, with reward people. And I think it's an awareness of what makes those jobs so important and the skills that people have in those jobs.
Yeah.
And wherever you sit, it's an understanding how you can work with those people.
Yeah.
Which I think is really important
Yeah.
because I'm not a specialist in any of those areas.
Yeah.
And continuous learning. I think I read as much as I possibly can, both from books and research papers. Research papers sometimes are a little bit difficult. I wouldn't necessarily say that's always the way to go.
AI helps with that.
AI, I'm sure. I think we're going to have more conversation about AI.
Yeah.
And the other thing is being open to being wrong. I'm a really big key of, if anyone listens to this and think I'm wholly wrong about something, I'm happy to be told that I'm wrong and why I'm wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that conversation and engaging conversations as much is important. Failing fast,
Yeah.
effectively.
Yeah. Oh, Alethea's left us. That must have been something we said. Yeah, no, do you know, I love that piece about failure in the sense that, again, it's something that I like to talk about. It's important in this space because there is no one correct answer. Because if there was, you'd just be doing it, right? You know, if there was one thing you could just do and no one would ever be stressed out and their well-being and performance would be optimized, you would just do that thing. But it doesn't exist. So, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try and work out what those things are. And that's where the failure comes in because you're not going to get it right first time, right?
Exactly. And a clear example of that, I started at Vitality week 1 going, cool, what we need to do is get people to eat this way, promote this much sleep. This is how much exercise and the type of exercise we need to get people to do. This is how they should be using their app. And it's like, this is how to be healthy. And you very quickly start to realize that when you talk to more and more people and then trying to do that on an organizational level, it won't work.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. And I think that's maybe going back to your original question, Alethea, around the skills. It's understanding that there's a difference between individual optimization and creating behavior change within an organization, and understanding that there is a difference between those, and that not one is better than the other. But sometimes in my job day to day, I have to put on that hat of this isn't about optimizing an individual's health. As much as I'd love that to be the conversation day to day, there's a point where when was the last time you were told you should do something and you actually did it?
Yeah, so true.
It doesn't happen. So
No.
I think that's an important differentiator of understanding the difference between individual optimization and changing a company. But also, I think that if your passion lies in individual optimization, and I think that there's wholly a role for that. It's just knowing that there's going to be some frustration because you're going to come up against someone like me who's going to go, I'd love to do that every day, but I know that for our population in X factory is not going to engage with that, or our population in Y office they don't have access to the tools that are going to help with that. So I think there's that it is a differentiator, and sometimes I think people don't understand there is a difference.
Yeah.
But it's an important one.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And just I meant to echo this before. You talked about just wanted to reiterate it. You talked about the personas. I think that's a really great idea. Having the different personas that you're targeting across the organization, because you cannot target everybody in the same way, right?
No.
And even within those personas, it's not going to be as simple as every farmer needs to be treated the same. But at least you're starting that personalization of the provision that you're providing.
And I think that's the big wave that's coming is how do we personalize, and whether that's AI driven, whether that's individually driven.
Yeah.
And it's the age old conversation of balancing wants versus needs for people as well. I think we've been having that. I mean, I've been exposed to that conversation for 10 years, and it's still not been cracked.
Yeah.
So you'll see someone pop up on LinkedIn and say, "Oh, all we need to do is analysis of wants versus needs," and it's like that. people who were around 10 years before me were saying that. It
Mm.
is still true. It's not being done. It's just how we do that is inherently complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, maybe a kind of a good place to start to wrap up in terms of what the future holds around the personalization and whatnot. Trying to think if there's a killer question to finish with. I don't think I've got one to. Is there anything that you wanted us to ask you that we've not asked? Is there anything that you
That's a
thought?
great question.
Not putting you on the spot with that one.
I guess we bring it back to not a question that I think you should ask me, but I think just bring it back to career path and career journey and being lucky. I think a really important thing within this space and this career is to actually have a standpoint of how you want to approach the topic of improving people's health.
Mm.
And I hope that's come across in how we've taught now. I have a very not set is the wrong word, but very deliberate and intentional way in which I believe we should work on how to improve health and well-being.
Yeah.
One that I'm happy to be challenged on, and where I am right now is because I've gone in with that. As I said, Vitality was individual optimization. It's been challenged over 7-8 years, and then we are where we are now. And it will change over the next 7 or 8 years because people will continue to challenge. But I think having that clear standpoint will mean that you get opportunities, but will also miss out on opportunities. But it means the opportunities you get are the right ones. I think if you think back to me getting that Vitality job, which started my career, was all because I stood in. We need to have a really positive way of encouraging people to change their behaviors and utilize digital technology to support that.
Yeah.
That was the whole standpoint I had, and that was the feedback to me was that's why you got the job because you had a standpoint. It was that thing.
Yeah.
Now it meant that I probably missed out on lots. I've been rejected from a lot of jobs. It's probably the same reason, but it means that the jobs that I have supported me doing the work that I want to do.
Yeah.
And that's what I learned from trying to be a sports scientist and realizing that I hated working professional football with.
I think it's a really good point to make though, because perhaps how we began this conversation was talking about the different directions that people come in to this career from. And that does sometimes leave us talking a lot and there not being enough strong voice about this, because maybe between us we're kind of all, in the woods, not knowing exactly what the solution is. So it's great to hear that has been useful for you in progressing your career, is just having a clear standpoint and perspective on things, and it definitely comes across in a very nice way, in a very good way. So thanks for sharing it with us today, Jake.
Thank you. Yeah.
No, it's no trouble. Thank you guys for the chat. It's been a great Friday afternoon.
Yeah, no problem. Are you in the working well community yet? And if not, why not?
I believe I'm not, so I need to then now be in the working well community.
Yeah, you go. Sign up.
Join
Get you
us.
signed up.
Amazing.
All right.
Amazing. We definitely need more voices in there, don't we, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, Jake. And
Thanks, Jake.
I look forward to speaking to you again in the future.
Yeah, no trouble at all, guys. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you.